He saw the bruises on the cleaning lady's face. What he did next changed everything. Dr. Jonathan Mitchell had built his reputation on precision. At 35, he was the youngest chief of surgery at Chicago Memorial Hospital, known for his steady hands and unshakable focus. His colleagues respected him, his patients trusted him, and the hospital board considered him their golden boy. But success had come at a price. While you're watching, please enjoy and subscribe. It really helps us tell more stories like this. Jonathan lived alone in a pristine downtown penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, worked 16-hour days, and hadn't spoken to his sister Emily in 2 years, not since their father's funeral, when she'd accused him of caring more about his career than family. The words still echoed in his mind during quiet moments. "You've become exactly like him, Jonathan. So focused on being perfect that you can't see the people bleeding right in front of you." He told himself it didn't matter. Saving lives was what mattered. But late at night, when the penthouse felt more like a mausoleum than a home, he wondered if Emily had been right. Their father, Dr. Richard Mitchell, had been a legendary surgeon too, brilliant, respected, and completely absent from his children's emotional lives. Jonathan had sworn he'd be different, but somehow he'd become the same man in a different generation. The night shift at Chicago Memorial was a different world. While the day brought controlled chaos, scheduled surgeries, routine rounds, administrative meetings, the night belonged to emergencies, skeleton crews, and the forgotten people who kept the hospital running when no one was watching. Sarah Chun was one of those people. At 28, she'd been cleaning the surgical wing for 18 months, arriving at 10 p.m. and leaving before dawn. She moved like a ghost through the halls, efficient and invisible, always wearing long sleeves despite the hospital's warmth. The doctors barely noticed her. The nurses offered polite nods. She preferred it that way. What they didn't know was that Sarah held a nursing degree from Northwestern University, graduating summa cum laude with dreams of working in pediatric oncology. What they couldn't see were the carefully concealed bruises on her arms, the fading fingerprints around her wrists, or the way she flinched at sudden movements. They didn't notice how she checked her phone obsessively throughout her shift, terrified of the messages that might be waiting, or worse, the silence that meant Marcus was planning something. Sarah had become an expert at reading moods, at anticipating violence before it erupted. She knew that Marcus's good days were often followed by his worst, that his apologies came with conditions, and that her dreams were seen as threats to his fragile ego. The cleaning job wasn't just about money, it was about survival, about staying invisible enough to avoid triggering his rage, while earning just enough to keep them afloat when his construction work dried up between seasons. It was a Tuesday night in October when their worlds collided. Jonathan had just finished a complex cardiac surgery that had run 4 hours over schedule. Exhausted and running on his 6th cup of coffee, he headed to the surgeon's lounge to grab his jacket. The room was dark except for the glow from a small desk lamp. Sarah was there, cleaning the coffee station, her back to him. She hadn't heard him enter over the soft jazz playing from her earbuds. Jonathan cleared his throat gently. Sarah spun around, her hand flying to her left cheek, and for a moment, their eyes met in the dim light. Even in the shadows, he could see the fresh bruise spreading across her cheekbone, the way her lip was slightly swollen. "I'm sorry, Dr. Mitchell," she whispered, quickly gathering her supplies. "I didn't know anyone was." "Wait." The word came out sharper than he intended, and she froze. Jonathan had seen enough trauma patients to recognize the signs. The defensive posture, the flinch, the way she instinctively covered the injury. "Are you okay?" Sarah's laugh was hollow. "Just clumsy. Walked into a door." The lie rolled off her tongue with practiced ease. But Jonathan had heard that same lie from countless patients in the ER. He took a step closer, and she took 2 steps back, bumping into the cleaning cart behind her. "Sarah." He'd read her name tag, but saying it aloud felt strangely intimate. "That's not from walking into a door." Her composure cracked for just a moment. He saw the flash of pain, of fear, before she rebuilt her walls. "I should go," she said, pushing past him toward the door. "If you ever need help," he started, but she was already gone, her footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. Jonathan didn't sleep that night or the next. He kept seeing her face, the terror in her eyes, when he'd stepped toward her. It reminded him of something, a memory he'd buried deep. His sister Emily at 16, making excuses for her boyfriend's behavior. The way she'd started wearing makeup to cover bruises they all pretended not to see. Their parents dismissing it as teenage drama, too busy with their own careers to look closer. And Jonathan, so focused on getting into medical school, studying for the MCAT, while Emily suffered in silence just down the hall. He remembered the night Emily had finally broken, calling him from her dorm room at Northwestern, sobbing so hard he could barely understand her words. He put me in the hospital, Johnny. 3 broken ribs and internal bleeding. But I told them I fell downstairs. I told them because I was scared, because I thought it was my fault. That was the night Jonathan had realized that all his medical knowledge meant nothing if he couldn't protect the people he loved most. Emily had survived, had healed, had even forgiven him eventually. But Jonathan had never forgiven himself for the months of willful blindness, for choosing his textbooks over his sister's tears. The next evening, Jonathan found himself staying late again, hoping to see Sarah. When she appeared in the surgical wing, he was waiting with coffee and a Danish from a cafeteria. "I brought you something," he said, setting them on the nurse's station counter. Sarah stared at the offerings like they might explode. "I can't accept. It's just coffee." Jonathan sat down in one of the plastic chairs, making himself less intimidating. And maybe a conversation. For 20 minutes, they talked about safe things. The unseasonably warm weather. The Cubs' disappointing season. Sarah's careful observations about the hospital's late-night rhythms. She was intelligent, articulate, nothing like the invisible cleaning lady everyone assumed her to be. When she mentioned growing up in Evanston, Jonathan's eyebrows raised. Northwestern. A shadow crossed her face. "I used to. I had different plans." "What happened?" Sarah was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she whispered, "I met someone who convinced me his dreams were more important than mine." 3 weeks of late-night conversations followed. Jonathan learned that Sarah had been valedictorian of her nursing class, that she'd given up a job at Children's Hospital when her boyfriend Marcus demanded she focus on supporting his struggling construction business, that she'd taken the cleaning job because Marcus said it was more appropriate for someone like her. Sarah learned that beneath Jonathan's surgical precision lived someone haunted by his own failures to protect the people he loved. That his sister Emily had nearly died from internal bleeding after her boyfriend's final assault. That Jonathan's workaholic tendencies were penance for the times he'd been too busy to notice her pain. Everything changed on a Thursday night in November when the first snow of the season began to fall. Jonathan was reviewing surgical notes when he heard shouting from the parking garage, the angry voice echoing off concrete walls and cutting through the winter air. Through the window, he saw Sarah backing away from a tall man with broad shoulders and clenched fists. Marcus, he realized from a photo she'd reluctantly shown him weeks earlier. The scene unfolded like a nightmare. Marcus had been drinking. Jonathan could tell from his unsteady gait and the aggressive way he invaded Sarah's space. She was holding her hands up defensively, trying to keep distance between them, but Marcus kept advancing, backing her against a concrete pillar. "You've been avoiding me," Marcus snarled, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "Coming home late, leaving early. You think I don't know what you're doing? You think I'm stupid. You think you're too good for me now." Marcus's voice carried up through the concrete structure. "Working in your fancy hospital, getting ideas." Jonathan was moving before he'd consciously decided to act. He took the stairs 3 at a time, his heart pounding with something that wasn't adrenaline, it was rage. "Sarah." Marcus grabbed her wrist, twisting it until she cried out. "You belong to me. You don't get to disappear. Let her go." Jonathan's voice cut through the night air like a scalpel. Marcus turned, still gripping Sarah's wrist. He was bigger than Jonathan, younger, with the kind of swagger that came from years of intimidating people. "This is none of your business, Doc." "Actually, it is." Jonathan pulled out his phone. "Hospital security is already on their way. You have about 30 seconds to walk away." Marcus laughed, but his grip on Sarah tightened. "You think you can save her? She's nothing. A cleaning lady who couldn't even finish school. She's a Northwestern-trained nurse who's worth 10 of you." Jonathan stepped closer, his voice deadly calm. "And if you don't let her go right now, I'll make sure the police know about every bruise, every broken promise, every night she's had to hide from you." For a moment, the 3 of them stood frozen in a tableau of tension. Then Sarah did something that surprised them all. She stopped pulling away from Marcus and instead stepped toward him, her voice steady and clear. "I'm done hiding," she said. "I'm done pretending your anger is my fault. And I'm done letting you steal my life." Marcus's grip loosened in shock and Sarah pulled free. But his surprise quickly turned to fury, and he raised his hand to strike her. Jonathan caught his wrist mid-swing. "I wouldn't," he said quietly, and something in his tone made Marcus step back. Security arrived moments later, followed by police. As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, he screamed threats that echoed off the concrete walls. Sarah sat in the back of an ambulance, giving her statement to a detective while a paramedic photographed her injuries. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, restraining orders, and slow healing. Jonathan helped Sarah find a pro bono attorney. He personally spoke to the hospital administrator about creating a domestic violence support program for employees. And when Sarah was ready, he helped her transition from the cleaning staff to a position in the pediatric unit. The first time Jonathan saw Sarah in scrubs, her scrubs with her name embroidered on the pocket, something shifted in his chest. She was still careful, still healing, but there was light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "How does it feel?" he asked, finding her during her lunch break in the hospital garden. Sarah touched the stethoscope around her neck like a talisman. "Like I'm remembering who I used to be, who I was meant to be." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the autumn leaves drift past the windows. After a while, Sarah spoke again. "Why did you help me? Really?" Jonathan considered lying, giving her the easy answer about human decency and professional obligation. Instead, he told her the truth. "Because I failed someone once. Someone who needed me to see her pain, and I was too busy looking the other way." He paused. "And because you reminded me that saving lives isn't just about what happens in the operating room." 6 months later, Sarah Chun, RN, was working the day shift in pediatrics, bringing comfort to sick children and hope to worried parents. She'd found an apartment in Lincoln Park, joined a support group, and was slowly learning to trust again. Jonathan had changed too. He still worked long hours, but he made time for the people who mattered. He'd reconciled with his sister Emily, who now served on the board of the domestic violence advocacy group he'd helped establish at the hospital. On a warm spring evening, Jonathan found Sarah on the hospital roof garden, where she often went to decompress after difficult shifts. She was tending to the small vegetable plot the staff had started, her hands gentle with the young plants. "Carrots?" he asked, settling beside her on the wooden bench. "Tomatoes," she corrected with a smile. "Though I planted them too close together. They'll need more space to grow properly." Jonathan watched her work, thinking about growth, about space, about the slow process of healing. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," he said finally. "Sometimes we all need someone close by while we figure out how to reach for the light." Sarah looked at him then, really looked, and saw not the untouchable surgeon she'd once feared to disturb, but a man who'd learned that true strength sometimes meant admitting you needed help, and being brave enough to offer it. Above them, the city lights twinkled like stars, and for the first time in years, both of them felt something they'd almost forgotten: hope. Not just for tomorrow, but for all the tomorrows that stretched ahead, full of possibility, and the promise that broken things could indeed be made whole again. In the distance, the night shift was beginning, and somewhere in those halls, other invisible people were moving through their own stories of pain and resilience. But here in the garden, surrounded by growing things and infinite potential, Sarah and Jonathan had learned the most important lesson of all: that healing happens not in isolation, but in the sacred space between one person's courage to ask for help and another's willingness to answer. If you like this story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring videos like this.